needs some help clarifying what causality means, and if there are different types of causality. Say, for instance, I have headaches. I choose to take meds for the pain. The meds also risk damage to my liver, and I'm aware of the risks. My liver fails, and I die. What was the cause of my death? Or another case, if every pregnancy requires prior insemination, is pregnancy caused by insemination? Even if not every instance of insemination causes pregnancy? Well, with regards to the second one, well, if every pregnancy requires prior insemination, pregnancy is caused by insemination. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to mix the biological with the philosophical, right? So at a physical level, for sure, pregnancy is caused by insemination. However, from a philosophical standpoint, pregnancy is caused by the choice to engage in sexual activity. Obviously procreative, usually raw dog sexual activity. So from a philosophical standpoint, because philosophy is not biology, a different discipline, right? So yes, if you have the egg and you have the sperm and fertilization occurs, you get an implantation occurs and all these dominoes fall, you get pregnancy. So that's from a biological standpoint. The question of philosophy is, well, how did that sperm get into proximity to the egg to begin with? And that's usually because, outside of rape and so on, that's because there's a choice to engage in procreative sexual activity. So from a biological standpoint, the cause is physical. From a philosophical standpoint, the cause is choice. Choice to engage in usually unprotected sex, or to engage in sex and, birth control fails or something like that, right? So, or you want to get pregnant, right? So it's the choice to engage in sex that is the cause of pregnancy. Philosophy is at the beginning of the dominoes, right? If there are dominoes, you're not far back enough in the causal chain to engage philosophy, right? So if the woman says, well, I'm pregnant and the cause of it was the sperm hitting my egg, well, that's not philosophy. And the question is, does choice matter in the situation? So once the sperm is in the woman, then there's no choice really about whether you can't will yourself to not get pregnant if the sperm is there, right? You guess you can will yourself to become unpregnant through an abortion, but if there's no free will involved, it's not the realm of philosophy. Now, you have a choice as to whether you engage in procreative sexual activity, but you don't have a choice once the sperm is around the egg, whether you get pregnant or not. That happens or it doesn't. In the same way, take an obvious example, in the same way, you have a choice as to whether you jump off a bridge or not. But once you jump off the bridge, you have no choice as to whether you fall or not. So you say, well, what's the cause of someone who dies from jumping off a bridge? Well, physics, biology would say the cause is the impact on the ground and the resulting trauma to the body and disruption of the systems and death of the organism, right? But that's not philosophy, that's physics and biology. Philosophy is where the choice is. Once choice has been committed, in other words, once there's no longer a choice, like you can choose to jump off a bridge, but you can't choose whether you fall or not. So once we're in the realm of physics and biology and choice is no longer possible, then philosophy has nothing to say about it. Philosophy can talk about the choices that lead you to the inevitabilities, but once something becomes inevitable, you jump off the bridge and you fall, once something becomes inevitable, it's no longer the realm of philosophy. This is the old analogy I've used of being a nutritionist, right? That a nutritionist will try to guide you towards healthy eating so you don't become obese and sick and so on, right? But if you don't listen to your nutritionist, because you have a choice there, right? Well, if you don't listen to your nutritionist and you're 300 pounds and your arteries are clogged and you're having a heart attack, it's no longer the realm of nutrition, right? There's no point calling your nutritionist saying, I'm having a heart attack, right? Call the ambulance, get to a hospital. So this is when you look at any particular proposition and you say, is there the realm of choice? Is there a choice? And not a closed choice, but an open-ended choice. So one trick that people use, this is not the person who's asking the question, but it's a great question. We'll get to the headache and liver thing in a sec. But one of sort of the classic ways that people attempt to destroy philosophy and make people depressed, horrified, anxious, and avoidant of moral choices is they give you two terrible choices and say that's philosophy. I mean, Sophie's Choice, where she has to choose which child she saves in the Holocaust, or the trolley problem where you have to throw a switch and kill, I don't know, one genius or 10 average people, whatever they make up of this kind of stuff. So they put you in a situation where there are two terrible choices and they say, choose in this agonizing, hellish situation where there's no good choice. And that's philosophy. And that has people avoid philosophy or think that moral choices are only in extremities, under coercive situations, and so on, right? And sometimes called the ethics of emergencies. Who do you eat first if you're trapped on a mountain in the Andes? Who do you throw overboard if the ship is sinking, right? These are all, you're not in a situation of choice. You're in a situation of extremity. Now, of course, people will say, but there is a choice. There is a choice in that you can, in the trolley problem, you can throw the switch and have the track go down side A or side B. So no, there totally is a choice. To which I would say that is not the realm of philosophy. Now, of course, I just said that the realm of philosophy is choice, but it's got to be open-ended choice. Once you're in a situation where somebody's got a gun to your head and says you have to shoot either your dog or your cat, right? Then you're not in a philosophical situation. You're in a situation of emergency alternatives dictated by somebody else's choice to use force upon you, right? So in the trolley example, it's the person who tied up the people or strapped them to the track or something like that. That person has made the choice. And when it's not an open-ended choice, then it's not a philosophical situation. So if you have a gun to your head and somebody says you got to shoot, or you got to, I don't know, hurt your dog or your cat, right? That's not a philosophical situation, because you already have the introduction of choice-limiting coercion. In the same way that if somebody ties somebody to the trolley tracks and you've got to throw a switch, of course, none of this makes any sense at all, right? It's all completely artificial. And the more artificial moral choices are presented as, the more they're trying to drive you away from morality by making it traumatic, right? Like, here are two, you got to shoot your dog or your cat. It's like, well, nobody wants to do that. That's horrible. And so I'm just going to avoid moral problems. None of it makes any sense. You can't even tie people to trolley tracks. Right? You guess you could tie them up and throw them on the trolley tracks, but then they could just wriggle off, or maybe you sedate them and tie them up and throw them on the tracks or something like that. But trolleys have drivers and drivers have brakes and trolleys can stop. Like, none of it makes any sense. It's all a completely artificial situation. So when you're in these emergency coercive alternative situations, all philosophy can do, it can't tell you what to do in the case of emergency coercive alternatives. It can't tell you what to do because there's no free choice, right? What it can do is it can say, here's how to avoid ending up in those situations, right? That's what philosophy can do. In the same way that a nutritionist can't tell you how to handle a heart attack, but the nutritionist can tell you how to avoid that situation. And how do you avoid a situation where you end up with something like a trolley problem? Well, you make sure that the non-aggression principle is applied to people in childhood so they're not brutalized and abused, so they don't end up tying people up and throwing them on trolley tracks, right? That's how, right? So it's about prevention. Or to put it another way, philosophy is about maximizing the amount of available choice in society. You do that by being the most peaceful and moral and voluntary towards children so that they don't end up putting other people in impossible situations, right? Terrible things are happening, and the only thing you have left is horrible alternatives. Well, philosophy can, of course, tell you whether if you're forced to shoot your dog or your cat, whether you should shoot your dog or your cat. I guess the ethics of self-defense would say you're justified in using force against the guy who's forcing you to shoot either your dog or your cat. But it can't tell you what to do in a situation of coercion. Philosophy is about prevention, not cure. And once choices have narrowed down to one or two or three coerced alternatives, philosophy is no longer present any more than nutrition is present when you're actively having a heart attack, right? So that's an important consideration to remember. If it's not open-ended, it's not philosophy. If it's not about prevention, it's not philosophy. Philosophy is about how to avoid getting into these situations. It's not about what you do when you're in those situations. So the question, he says, I have headaches. I choose to take meds for the pain. The meds also risk damage to my liver, and I'm aware of the risks. My liver fails, and I die. What was the cause of my death? Well, the cause of your death was the avoidance of choices. Now, from a biological standpoint, you'd say, well, the meds damage the liver, your liver fails, and you die. What was the biological cause of your death? Well, the biological cause of your death was liver poisoning from pain medication. Philosophically, like once the pain medication is in your system and impacts on your liver and your liver fails and you die, once the pain medication is in your system, well, that's like the sperm being in the vagina or birth canal or fallopian tubes of the woman. Once it's there, well, things are going to happen, right? And once those dominoes are in place, then philosophy has nothing to say. So the question philosophy would answer is before you take the path of pain meds, right? Before you take the path of pain meds, that's where philosophy is. So philosophy would say, okay, so you have headaches. Now you have a number of choices on how to deal with those headaches, right? You have a number of choices on how to deal with those headaches. One of those choices is pain meds. And philosophy would say that the solution that requires the least alteration and increases knowledge the most is probably best. The least biological alteration, right? So let's say you're depressed, right? I mean, let's say you can munch a bunch of pills that will mask the symptoms of depression. Well, that's the most alteration and the least gain of knowledge. Now, philosophy would probably say something like, or this would be my sort of first approach, would say, okay, so minimum alteration is probably for the best, because the body is a complex system. And the less you mess with a complex system, the more predictable the outcomes are going to be. So medicine, in some ways, is like coercion in society. You want as little as humanly possible if there are alternatives. So if you have a bad infection that your body can't fight, then yes, take some antibiotics, but that's kind of like an extremity of self-defense in a coercive situation. If you consistently get infections, you probably need to look for an underlying cause and not just keep nuking yourself with antibiotics, because the antibiotics are going to have effects on your digestion and all other kinds of things and so on, right? So the least external intervention and the greatest gain of knowledge is probably the best approach. Now, you understand, these are all analogies. There's no medical advice here. I'm not a doctor. Right? These are all just analogies for self-knowledge and philosophy. Consult your doctor. If you have any medical issues, don't listen to podcasters. All right. So with regards to a headache, the question is, why am I getting headaches? Now, if you nuke the symptoms with painkillers, you do not gain the knowledge of why you're getting headaches. Maybe you're getting headaches because you're really stressed. Maybe you're getting headaches because your pillow was really bad. Maybe you're getting headaches because you don't exercise and you sit all day. Maybe you're getting headaches because your posture is bad. Maybe you're getting headaches because you're surrounded by disruptive and abusive people that are causing you a misery. Like maybe there could be any number of reasons as to why you're getting headaches. Some of them may be psychological, some of them may be physical but correctable by yourself, like posture and sleeping, and some of them, maybe you've got a brain tumor. I don't know, right? This is what is it they say? My ear is itchy. WebMD. Cancer. So you would want to look at root causes rather than nuke symptoms. If you have, repetitive headaches, then you probably need to look more into your whole physical and psychological well-being scenario and environment rather than just nuke the symptoms. So in this causality, right, I have headaches. I choose to take meds for the pain. So why would you choose to take meds for the pain? If you have headaches, you have sort of consistent headaches, and you choose to take meds for the pain, why would you do that? Well, you would do that because you want to avoid knowledge. You want to avoid the knowledge of why you have headaches. Now, why you'd want to avoid the knowledge, that's a whole other question. If you're surrounded by people who are exploiting you and the headaches are the result of the stress of being exploited, then obviously the people who are exploiting you want you to take aspirin rather than figure out that your headaches are stress-related because you're being exploited by people. They would much rather you take meds than figure out the cause, right? Of course, the aspirin manufacturers or whatever, they would rather you take that. The doctor would probably rather prescribe pain meds than try and figure out root causes because it's not his specialty, and so on, right? Now, it's painful to figure out root causes. And so taking meds to mask symptoms rather than figuring out root causes is based upon the preference for short-term gain over long-term gain. You would rather take pills to deal with the pain of a headache rather than figure out the root causes of the headache and change lifestyle or relationship or exercise habits or posture habits or whatever it is going to be, right? So you would rather mask symptoms than deal with root causes in the same way that some people would rather take painkillers for a headache, for a toothache rather than go to the dentist and deal with the root causes and the root problems. So from a biological standpoint, yeah, the toxins in the painkillers kill your liver dying kills you, and that's the cause from a biological standpoint. But from a philosophical standpoint, the cause would be avoiding self-knowledge, avoiding the knowledge of the cause of the headaches and dealing with root causes and changing lifestyle or habits or whatever it is, right? Now, of course, maybe you go through every conceivable root cause. I'm not even sure what that would mean, but let's say you do go through every conceivable root cause and you just have some problem with the headaches. I don't know what this would mean, but, let's just say that there's nothing you can do about the headaches. You just have mystery headaches, and there's no stretching, no exercise, no chiropractic, there's nothing, stress reduction, no better sleeping. There's absolutely nothing you can do. Well, then the cause of your death is still not the headaches. The cause of your death is that you will choose to risk death rather than live with headaches. Right? Now, again, headaches of all different kinds of severity, that sort of minor ache from off sleep to, I don't know, maybe migraine, so I guess would be different. So wherever the dominoes are inevitable, there is no philosophy. Wherever the choice is limited, there is no philosophy. So people say, well, what's the ethics of the trolley problem? There are no ethics of the trolley problem. It's like saying the nutrition of a heart attack. There are no ethics of the trolley problem, other than a society has probably violated children's integrity, physical, emotional, through abuse in order to produce people who want to torture others with trolley scenarios, right? That's probably because the trolley scenario, sort of the ethics of emergencies, is all just a form of verbal abuse. Putting you in impossible situations and saying you're responsible for the outcome, that's just putting you in a situation of verbal abuse, right? Choose these two impossible situations, both of which are going to make you feel terrible, and that's just a form of verbal abuse, right? I mean, it's like some really sadistic father putting two plates in front of his kid saying, one's poop and one's vomit, but you got to eat one. And then mocking him for the rest of his life for eating poop or vomit, right? It's just sadism. It's just verbal abuse. And because you'll notice that every time you come up with solutions, they're not allowed, right? Well, I just get the people off the tracks. No, you can't. Well, I just yell at the guy to put the brakes on the trolley. Well, they're not working. Like it's all designed to just make you feel terrible about questions of virtue and ethics and all of that. So that's important. Anytime you're not in an open field of choice, philosophy doesn't apply. Philosophy is about free will, and free will cannot be constrained by violations of free will. I mean, it can be constrained, but then it's not free will anymore. Right? Somebody puts a gun to your head, you don't have free will anymore. I mean, to say that situations of coercion are philosophical is to say that situations where free will is being violated are free will situations. I mean, it's actually offensive, like deep down. It's like saying that the guy who gives money to a robber who's got a gun to his head is charitable and voluntarily transferring property. It's like equating lovemaking with rape. And situations of free will are where philosophy is. Situations with your gun to your head has nothing to do with philosophy, other than it probably resulted from prior violations of free will, particularly with regards to the child and abuse. So, all right, let's do one more here.